Chapter 9, Heaven Sent Talent 3. For young Hoon Hyung Nim to become the best in the world, it was truly a matter of moments. It's even faster than the last life. In just 5 years, he traveled all over Yanguo, visiting major factions in each province and city, competing against peak masters, and defeating them all. In 3 years, he secured the seat of one of the 3 great swordsmen of the world, and within 2 more years, he overcame the remaining 2 to earn the title of Yanguo's #1 warrior. Then, admiring his realm, leaders of the 4 stars 3 demons of Sukyung City who reached the 3 flowers, joined forces to attack him. Fighting against them 7-1, he emerged victorious, solidifying his position as the undisputed best in the world. It feels a bit empty. You're talking from a place of being full privilege, Hyung Nim. I replied while practicing the Severing Mountain swordsmanship in front of him. Thanks to young Hoon Hyung Nim's consistent guidance over the past 5 years when we weren't engaged in martial contests, my martial arts skills had improved from mid-second rate to late second rate. Now, my techniques were fully embodied, allowing me to use martial techniques and unleash internal energy effortlessly. Being full, I'm rather envious of you, Yoon Hyung. You're in the late second stage, with many opponents to test and refine yourself against. But for me, everyone's just weaker. Who am I supposed to face? You'd have the heads of the 4 stars 3 demons bursting if they heard you say that. It's a bit of an unfortunate truth. The record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts is just an extraordinarily unconventional martial arts system. It seems no martial artist can overcome it. He looked up at the sky with a somewhat indifferent expression. Even the next stage, 5 energies converging to the origin, which follows 3 flowers gather at the summit, seems attainable soon enough with this martial record. Once I reach that stage, even the strongest masters of Yanguo, who was somewhat challenging in joint attacks, will be easy to defeat. In young Hoon Hyung Nim's eyes, a sense of listlessness had settled. What should I do next? I sensed an ominous feeling. No, if young Hoon Hyung Nim's thoughts turned towards the Woolen Alliance. This life, too, would be bound to hard labor like a cow, just as in the last life. Having held a high position in my past life, and with my skills having reached late second rate this time, I could probably manage better. But that also means I'd be exploited even more. I needed to quickly think of something else to divert his thoughts. How about traveling? Traveling the martial world. I've done plenty of that traveling around Yanguo for the past 5 years. No, not in Yanguo. What about neighboring countries like Shengji or Biokra? They have their own martial worlds. Visiting the martial worlds of neighboring countries. Yes, there you might find masters who match Hyung Nim's tastes. Though it seems unlikely anyone could reach the level of record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts. After pondering for a while, he nodded in agreement. All right, a martial world tour of the neighboring countries isn't a bad idea. So, young Hoon Hyung Nim and I spent 6 months learning the languages and scripts of Shengzi and Biokra, touring their martial worlds. 2 more years passed. Young Hoon Hyung Nim defeated 12 3 Flowers Peak Masters in Biokra, achieving enlightenment and reaching the 5 Energies realm. Now, he has rejuvenated, becoming even younger than me. He had earned the title of the best in all 3 countries, Yanguo, Biokra and Shengzi. However, his face didn't seem happy at all. Yoon Hyun, what should I do now? An overwhelming sense of listlessness. The feeling of listlessness that no martial artist could match him anymore. With the satisfaction of advancing towards the peak of record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts. It seemed he had lost interest in the affairs of the martial world. Why don't you establish a martial faction, Hyung Nim? I suggested another task to him. A martial faction. Yes, gather talents from all over the country, teach them, and turn them into masters capable of facing Hyung Nim. Even if I train talents, when they take 1 step forward, I will have already moved 10 steps ahead. That's true, unfortunately. As arrogant as it may sound, His martial arts talent was indeed at a mind-boggling level. Still, you need to compare in order to see what is short and what is long, meaning the true nature of things can only be judged when verified yourself. Furthermore, if we have the power and wealth equivalent to a martial faction, we can invite those reclusive masters for you, young Nim. This was indeed true. Of course, these reclusive masters were not martial artists but rather the cultivators I learned about in my past life, who secretly operated throughout the martial world. These cultivators hardly interfere in personal matters. Whether the world's #1 martial artist is born or whatever, they don't care. But they always intervened in organizations that could cause disturbances in the martial world. That's why we never had the chance to encounter any cultivators while traveling across the 3 countries. Well, alright, then let's create a faction under my fame. Thus, a faction was established in the name of Young Hoon, the world's #1 martial artist. The faction was named Palace of Martial Extremity, following the name of record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts. Exhausting martial arts can also be read as extreme martial arts. Under the fame of the world's #1 martial artist, countless martial artists joined the faction, including 7 who had reached the pinnacle of 3 flowers. Palace of Martial Extremity quickly became the #1 faction in Yanguo, and as its vice leader, I spent 3 years stabilizing it. After 3 years, the Palace of Martial Extremity became a massive faction well known across Yanguo. Once the palace's influence reached a level that could affect the entire martial world, they came. Cultivators. Young Hoon Hyun Nim asked upon seeing the guests who had suddenly visited us one day. What are these cultivators? I can tell they are quite uniquely spirited. They all wore robes of different colors, covering their bodies completely, and wore hats and veils that concealed their faces. The only aspect that could possibly identify them was their voice, but even that seemed to be altered by some strange spell, making their voices sound similar. One day, as Young Hoon Hyun Nim and I suddenly faced these visitors, he was intrigued. So, you want our Palace of Martial Extremity to pledge loyalty to your organization of cultivators? Indeed, his eyes were shining, looking at them with never-before-seen spirit. His eyes, free from listlessness, were filled with competitive spirit, sparkling brilliantly. That is correct. We are originally a clan of cultivators who cultivate the way of immortality. We do not interfere in worldly affairs, but we felt the need for minimal guidance and control over the secular world. Thus, we have been operating in secret across royal families, financial circles, political circles, and the martial world, supporting them, endorsing them, and helping their power. Continue. Hey, the return for that is not much. You just have to swear loyalty to our clan for generations and help us when we occasionally intervene in worldly matters. Hey, how fascinating. I had no idea such a world existed. Young Hoon Hyun Nim chuckled, looking at the 3 cultivators who had come to us. What happens if I refuse? At his reply, a faint murderous intent seemed to emanate from the 3 cultivators. We will leave today, but your faction will be shunned by all other factions. No merchant groups or family clans will seek to be your disciples. The government and the royal family will also try to bring you down by any means. If that's all, it doesn't seem very scary. Young Hoon Hyun Nim smirked and crossed his arms. Not scared to fight against the entire Yanguo, truly outrageous. How dare this mortal show such arrogance in front of cultivators? The cultivator standing behind the one speaking showed his killing intent and raised his hand. Whoosh! Suddenly, starlight seemed to flash, and starlight poured from the cultivator's hand. At the same time, Young Hoon Hyun Nim's saber flashed like lightning from his waist. Boom! The side of the hall where we were talking exploded. Stay close to me, Yoon Hyun. You'll be safe behind me. I know. I smiled wryly in the dust cloud, seeing the 3 cultivators showing their rage. It seems they have a slightly different idea. How dare a mortal draw a saber against cultivators? You were the ones who attacked first. Quiet. We don't need a barking dog like you, Just kill and turn into a puppet. Talking about immortality and such, but your thoughts are no different from those of demons. The three cultivators mumbled incantations and formed hand seals. The foremost cultivator began to cast another spell. Whoosh! However, before the spell could fully unfold, it was sliced away by young Hoon Hyun Nim's saber. What is this? Before they could react, young Hoon Hyun Nim dashed into the blind spot and kicked all three in the stomach. Ugh! Ah! Ah! The three seemed to fall below the hall but slowed the descent with a strange spell midway. Their clothes were covered in dust, and the areas where young Hoon Hyun Nim had kicked them were completely torn. Listen, cultivators! Young Hoon Hyun Nim roared with internal energy in his voice, resonating like a lion's roar. I will not pledge loyalty to the likes of you. Make me a public enemy of the martial world or the enemy of Yanguo if you can. I am not afraid of the likes of you coming at me. Boom, boom, boom. Simultaneously, the finger snaps he emitted hit the ground beside the cultivators with a massive sound. No one dares to stand above me. The three cultivators seethed and then used a strange spell to flee. I cautiously approached him and asked, Hyung Nim, can you handle the aftermath? Ha ha ha, aftermath, you say? His eyes were filled with an undeniable thrill. It was almost akin to madness. What aftermath? I've realized it, Yoon Hyun. What do you mean? The thirst that wasn't quenched no matter how many martial artists I faced with record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts. The satisfaction that never came no matter how much I fought. Yes, that was the thirst I felt because I used a martial art not meant for mortals against mortals. His face was filled with excitement as he clenched his fist. Cultivators. Yes, surely this martial record is a martial art meant for defeating those cultivator scoundrels. Finally, I've found the purpose of my martial art. I've discovered the intent of my martial art, and you're talking about the aftermath. Quote ellipsis question mark quote. This martial art is for fighting. Cultivators. So, to grow further, I need to fight cultivators. Ha ha ha. Finally, the path to mastering the record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts has become clear. I thought I had fully grasped his nature after spending a long time with him. But humans are indeed creatures that show different aspects every time. Gather the martial enforcers and elders of the faction. From today, excluding you, I will expel all the mediocre ones from the faction. If those cultivator bastards are going to make a fuss, there's no leisure to peacefully teach disciples. Immediately, he assembled all the disciples of the faction and sent home all those second-rate and below. He even sent away those in the first rank who had not yet mastered sword energy. Thus, only about 310 people remained in the Palace of Martial Extremity, including 5 elders who had reached 3 flowers, 303 disciples of the first rank and above, and me, a vice-leader of the late second rank. From that day, young Hoon Hyun Nim taught the record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts to the elders who had reached 3 flowers gather at the summit. He also taught the first-rank disciples the principles of the martial record, including sword formations and combined tactics, to hold their own against cultivators. And you should focus on reaching the first rank as soon as possible. To advance from the late second rank to the first rank, it's crucial to completely embody your martial art into your body. Every day was a hellish training routine, until the martial art called Severing Mountain Swordsmanship was completely fused into my body. After beating up and driving away the cultivators, our faction's building, which had been authorized by the government, was designated as an illegal construction, and we had to leave. Furthermore, we received an order from the government to completely dissolve our faction. But, ignore it, Hyung Nim simply replied and continued to instruct the elders and disciples, and me in martial arts. A month passed after defying the government's order. We discovered wanted posters with young Hoon Hyun Nim's and my faces on them in the streets. The government had issued a bounty on us, branding us as traitors. We're leaving. Young Hoon Hyun Nim again answered succinctly, taking 5 elders and 300 disciples, wandering the wilderness. Bounty hunters lured by our bounty attacked us, but they were taken care of by the first-rank disciples before even reaching Hyung Nim. When the number of bounty hunters we had killed reached about 100, the major factions of the entire martial world issued a joint statement declaring us a public enemy of the martial world. Our palace of martial extremity was called Palace of Demons, and Young Hoon Hyun Nim was given the nickname Extreme Demon. Our bounty increased even more, and small and medium-sized factions from all over the country joined forces to attack us. And thus, 10 years passed. 10 years since we became enemies of the entire martial world. It has been 20 years since my regression. Young Hoon Hyun Nim's title had evolved from Extreme Demon to Extreme Heavenly Demon. In the martial world, we were no longer called Palace of Demons but Palace of Heavenly Demons. In these 10 years, many of the 300 disciples who experienced countless real battles had reached the peak. This was partly due to their practical experience and continuous practice of the principles of the record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts, including sword formations and united tactics. Those who hadn't reached the pinnacle realm were at the very top of first-rate martial artists, and they were known as the direct forces of the Palace of Heavenly Demons, gaining fame. Meanwhile, as the Palace of Heavenly Demons remained undefeated for 10 years, various unorthodox sects and demonic groups, and occasionally righteous factions admiring the extreme heavenly demon Young Hoon, joined us. The Palace of Heavenly Demons had grown enormously compared to 10 years ago. Precisely, excluding the official 310 feet members of the palace, the rest were merely followers attracted by our fame. From the outside, the palace now looked like a religious faction, a vast power filled with fanaticism for the extreme heavenly demon. Everything had changed tremendously compared to 10 years ago. The only things unchanged were Young Hoon Hyung Nim and me. How are you still barely hanging on to first rate after 10 years of practical experience, internal energy development, and continuous sword practice? Yes, Hyung Nim must be pleased that you improved the record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts to the point of evolving it. I still lacked talent, and he was still overflowing with it. I grumbled and continued practicing my swordsmanship. 10 years. After 10 years of diligent training, I had just managed to gain freedom in my swordsmanship, barely stepping into early first rate. But how can the vice leader of the Palace of Heavenly Demons still not use sword energy, Yoon Hyun? Do you know what your nickname is? What is my nickname? You don't have one. Since you, barely hanging on early first rate, can't do anything in important battles, no one pays attention to you, and that's why you don't have a nickname. But I'm not a direct combatant. What do you expect me to do? That's right. I hadn't participated in battles for 10 years due to my lack of talent in martial arts. Instead, I learned disguise, infiltration, instigation, mechanical traps, and espionage to assist the palace. It wasn't that I didn't want to improve my martial arts. No matter how much I train, I just can't advance. Those in the late first class are on the verge of reaching the peak for 10 years. Those in the mid-first class had been honing their skills to reach the peak for 10 years. I was the only one who barely managed to hang on to the early first class from the late second class. Of course, being first-rate was equivalent to a large faction elder or a small faction sect leader, which was respectable. If I had joined a large sect, I could have secured an elder position. But in the Palace of Heavenly Demons, which had seen the principles of record of transcending cultivation and exhausting marital arts and received teachings from the best martial artist for 10 years, numerous disciples were on the verge of reaching the peak. While they were just on the verge, the gap between the peak and first class was like heaven and earth. First-class martial artists could never beat those at the peak. The only way a first-class martial artist could win against a peak martial artist was if more than 50 first-class martial artists used swarm tactics to exhaust the peak master's physical and mental strength. In the Palace of Heavenly Demons, Where many were on the verge of the pinnacle realm, I was treated as the weakest link. However, why are you the only one complaining about me, young Nim? Even the elders who learned directly from you recognize my contributions. Knowing my weakness, I strive to be helpful in other areas. Using my past life experience as the chief strategist of the Woolen Alliance, I gathered intelligence, infiltrated, disguised, and brought crucial information to the palace. Young Nim, you're the only one who's too harsh on me. Who's being harsh on you, Yoon Hyun? I've been guiding you for 10 years, but it's frustrating that you're still barely hanging on to first rate after all this time. No, is first rate some family's dog name? Ordinary people become first rate at this age. Of course, compared to those ordinary people, I was worse. If I consider all my lifetimes, I'm well over 100 years old. Having practiced martial arts for over a century and being only early first rate, my martial arts talent was truly dreadful. It's just that my regression advantage had concealed this. I've been annoyed with the information you brought and now this. He rubbed his head as if it hurt. That evening, young Nim and the elders gathered at his call. Lately, there have been suspicious movements. It seems that the government and the martial world are collaborating to attack us. At young Nim's words, the elders' faces twitched. Those worthless things, just what do they think they are? We have 6 monsters who have mastered record of transcending cultivation and exhausting martial arts here. It seems like a needless worry for extreme heavenly demon. Then, young Nim looked at me and gestured. I spread out the documents I had gathered through espionage and explained the situation. It's not simple. Recently, behind the government and the martial world, the cultivator clan, which has been scheming, is planning to personally intervene as we have remained uncontrolled for over 10 years. Cultivators. If the vice leader brought this information. The vice leader is excellent in all aspects except martial arts, so it's believable. Was that a compliment or an insult? Enhart v Epsilon LBN, a universe of stories awaits. I coughed and explained how I got the information and the situation we were in. So, it's likely that the government and martial world will push us toward where the cultivator clan is. What do you plan to do? I smiled and explained the strategy. Before we fall into the cultivators' hands, let's strike them first. Attack the cultivators. Yes, though they are cultivators, they are currently scattered across the country, scheming in various places. If we defeat them while they're separated, their plans will be futile. An elder asked me a question. So, have you pinpointed the locations of these scheming cultivators? I'm confident that I know where over 90% of them are. As expected of the vice leader. Such reliable intelligence. Actually, it was information I had desperately gathered in my past life as the chief strategist of the Woolen Alliance. It was information that could never be obtained in a situation like now, where we had become enemies of the martial world. We are planning to seek out the cultivators and engage in battle, hence everyone needs to improve their skills. Especially the vice leader. I'll take responsibility and definitely make you stronger than the lowest ranks of the Palace of Heavenly Demons. Young Nim patted my shoulder while laughing heartily. Ha ha, I saw the vice leader being scolded by the palace leader during training this morning. You've been continuing your training since then. You're really diligent, ha ha ha. Of course, it wouldn't do for the vice leader of the Palace of Heavenly Demons to be weaker than the lowest ranks of the force. The elders also laughed heartily, teasing me. And a few days later, we set out to individually defeat the cultivators scattered throughout Yanguo. Finished, A Regressor's Tale of Cultivation, Chapter 9, Heaven Sent Talent 3. Next, Chapter 10, Heaven Sent Talent 4.